In the bustling city, I, an ordinary college student, had an accidental encounter with my aloof professor. That day, I embarrassingly spilled water on myself, but unexpectedly discovered that he possessed a gentleness quite different from his appearance. He gently patted my back, and at that moment, I seemed to see a sea of stars in his eyes. Since then, I began to pay attention to his every move and even secretly moved across from his apartment, just to catch a glimpse of him more often. I cautiously approached, trying to enter his world, only to find that his life was far more complicated than I had imagined. And in this process, I gradually lost myself, falling deeply in love with him. His logic was as bizarre as his confidence. Finally, he let out a deep sigh. Well, that was embarrassing. First time doing that in front of a girl. He stood up and pulled his pants back on. Embarrassing? He'd just finished, and now he was embarrassed? He was like one of those guys who acts all cool afterward. Just as I thought my bladder might explode, Dr. Thompson finally returned. The locksmith had the door open in 2 minutes. Dr. Thompson patted my shoulder. Did you two have a good time? Andrew pulled his dad's hand off my shoulder and steered him away. Dad, you're evil. A few days later, Dr. Thompson told me about an exchange program at Harvard University and offered me the spot. I accepted happily and eagerly added my new professor on social media. Juliet, when can you come? Was the first message from my new professor. Given that it was Harvard, I assumed the professor would be strict. I could already see my publications lining up. Anytime. Then come tomorrow. I'd agreed, so no matter how tired I was, I had to go. The next day, I took the train to Harvard. Following the address my professor gave me, I knocked on his office door, but it was Andrew who opened it. Juliet, I just want to know more about you, so pretending to be my girlfriend doesn't feel too weird. But it felt weird to me. I shook my head. He ignored me and started rambling about his past, trying to make this fake relationship less awkward. By the time he finished, I didn't feel weird anymore. In fact, I felt like he could be my best friend. I crouched next to him and patted his shoulder. Are you constipated or something? He looked at me, startled, then nodded seriously. A little. I slapped his thigh, the sound echoing through the bathroom. Me too. Then I burst out laughing. After a moment, we realized something was off. I looked down at his leg, where I'd slapped him. It was already turning red. His pants were around his thighs, but his shirt was long enough to cover him. It hit us both at the same time. He was literally on the toilet. I covered my eyes and retreated to the corner. You do you. Maybe the shock did it, because we finally heard the sound of running water. No singing, no awkward conversation. Just the sound of our breathing in the silent bathroom. As the only woman in my STEM graduate lab, I knew I'd stand out. But I didn't expect my professor, Dr. Thompson, to immediately try setting me up with his tall, handsome, and brilliant son on the first day of class. As a science nerd, I politely declined. But Thompson didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, he kept dropping hints about his son, Andrew. Then came the lab dinner. Dr. Thompson laid down the law. Either bring a boyfriend or add my son on social media. Standing outside the restaurant, I panicked. That's when I spotted a tall, good-looking guy scanning the crowd. Perfect. I marched up to him. Hey, do you have a girlfriend? He glanced at me. No. I clapped my hands. Great. You're about to get one. Before he could protest, I looped my arm through his and dragged him inside. Wait, I'm actually here to meet someone. I cut him off. Help me out, and I'll help you find whoever you're looking for. He tried to pull away, but I held on tight. I don't need your help. Ignoring him, I pulled him into our private room. The moment we walked in, my lab mates erupted. Let's see if our junior brought a boyfriend or if she's waiting for the boss to set her up. Since Thompson covered most of our expenses and even paid us a stipend. We called him the boss. When they saw me with a handsome stranger, the room fell silent. My lab mates nervously glanced at Thompson. I took a few steps forward. Dr. Thompson, this is my boyfriend. The guy looked at me, then at my professor. Dad? Dad? I echoed. The guy I'd randomly picked was actually my professor's son. I thought he was studying abroad? Dr. Thompson laughed and waved us over. I was trying to set you two up, but it looks like you beat me to it. No wonder Juliet kept refusing to add you on social media. Andrew pulled his arm free and raised an eyebrow at me. When did we start dating? About 5 minutes ago, I guess. Since I'd claimed we were a couple, my lab mates seated us together. During dinner, I was busy stuffing my face when Andrew leaned over and whispered, I'm Andrew. I heard them call you Juliet, so I'll call you that too. I nodded, my mouth full. Since we're dating, shouldn't we get to know each other? I nodded again. He told me he'd just returned from abroad and planned to stay in the country. Then he started listing his achievements, scholarships, awards, and, most impressively, 23 first author publications. That's when I perked up. I grabbed his arm and squealed in my most exaggerated voice, "Honey, I love you." He sighed and handed me a piece of meat. "As flattering as that is, those papers have nothing to do with you." I let go and went back to eating. "But," he added with a smirk, "future papers could." I didn't believe him, especially with that smug look on his face. When I didn't respond, he muttered, "If someone's willing to keep calling me, honey, that is." Selling my dignity was out of the question, unless it was for publications. Then all bets were off. Dr. Thompson was in unusually high spirits and kept drinking until he passed out. Andrew struggled to lift him, and I rushed to help when it looked like he might drop him. But once we got him to the car, Dr. Thompson grabbed my shirt and wouldn't let go. Andrew shrugged. "Help me get him home." None of my lab mates volunteered, so I reluctantly agreed. We got drive Thompson into the backseat, and I turned to leave, but Andrew stopped me. "Can you drive? I've been abroad too long and don't know how to drive here." "Then call a designated driver." "I'm not familiar with the apps here." "I'll call one for you." "Publications?" "Fine, honey, I'll drive." I hopped into the driver's seat. Andrew relaxed in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone like a pro. I helped him carry drive Thompson upstairs, and when he asked for water, I carefully handed him a cup, only for him to spill it all over me. I ran to the bathroom to check the damage. My stomach was red and burned. Andrew rushed in. "Are you okay?" I pulled my shirt down. "I'm fine, but this is going to cost you 2 papers." He smiled. "Deal." Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the bathroom door shut. Andrew tried the handle, but it broke off. He looked at me innocently. "It's broken." Before I could react, Dr. Thompson called from outside. "Oh, it's broken? Hang on, I'll find a locksmith. It'll only take 3 or 4 hours." 3 or 4 hours? Andrew nodded. "He's getting old." He moved slowly. But the sound of his footsteps as he left didn't sound slow at all. The bathroom was tiny, and neither of us had our phones. We were stuck staring at each other. "So, should we do something?" I asked Andrew. He glanced at the toilet, then at the shower. "Shower together? Or, use the toilet together?" Yeah, there weren't many activities for 2 people in here. I sat on the closed toilet lid, while Andrew crouched near the shower, both of us propping our chins on our hands, deep in thought. "Juliet, I kinda need to use the bathroom," he said. I nodded. "Same here." I'd had a lot to drink at dinner and had been holding it in for a while, but this was beyond awkward. "Maybe." "No." Finally, he couldn't hold it anymore and looked at me pleadingly. "How about you pretend to be my girlfriend for the night? That way, if you hear anything, it won't be as embarrassing." "Seriously? That's the best you've got?" But I didn't have a better idea. I covered my ears and retreated to the corner. He sat on the toilet for a while but couldn't go. He decided that maybe my presence was making it awkward, so he started singing to distract himself. Let's just say his singing was not great. After a while of his wailing, I couldn't take it anymore. If he kept this up, I might lose my sanity. "Dude, stop. If you keep howling, I might not live long enough to see those publications." He finally shut up and gave me a sideways glance. "If I don't take care of this soon, I might not live long enough to write them." "Fine," I caved. "Keep singing, then." He kept at it for a while but still couldn't go. "Maybe we should get to know each other better?" "Seriously? In a bathroom? At a time like this?" I hugged myself and shook my head. "No way." He looked at me, incredulous. "You don't think I'd force you, do you?" I nodded. He sighed and ran his hands through his hair, messing it up. With this face, if anything happened, I'd be the one losing out. It was like he'd turned on some soothing background music, long and oddly relaxing. I froze. He patted my head. "Juliet, welcome to my team." I blinked. "Your social media name is Serene Soul. Doesn't really match your age." He smiled. "It's unique." Unique, indeed. I'd expected my new professor to be some middle-aged man who dedicated his life to research. But here was Andrew, barely 2 years older than me. I couldn't bring myself to call him Professor. He pointed to the seat across from him. "Put your stuff down over there." I obediently did as I was told. "I just got here, so I don't have any students yet." "You're my first," Andrew said with a grin. "How about calling me Professor?" But with that smug look on his face, I couldn't bring myself to say it. After a few seconds of internal struggle, I gave up. I can't accept a professor who, did that in front of me. I turned and sat down across from him, pretending to organize my things while sneaking glances at him. My words seemed to hit him hard. He froze, then stiffly walked back to his seat. Seeing him so rattled, I decided to press my advantage. Also, that sound was underwhelming, not exactly impressive. His hands trembled with anger, and it took him a moment to grit out, "Juliet, you're such a good student." Apparently, I'd annoyed him enough on day one that he decided to work me to the bone. New professors are always eager to climb the ranks, and Andrew was no exception. He needed research results fast. He often stayed in the office until midnight, and by the time I arrived in the morning, he was already at work. The relentless schedule eventually took its toll, and I got sick. I woke up feeling dizzy but thought it was nothing. I figured I'd just freshen up and head to the office. But the moment I got out of bed, my legs gave out. Before I passed out, I grabbed my phone and dialed a number at random. It rang once before someone answered, but I blacked out before I could speak. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Andrew was sitting next to me in a white shirt, laptop open, in the middle of a meeting. He noticed I was awake, took off one of his headphones, and tucked the blanket around me. "You're awake?" I nodded, not wanting to interrupt his meeting. "Rest for a bit. I'll finish this up quickly." I closed my eyes, listening to his deep, smooth voice as he spoke. It was an international conference, and everything was in English. Even though I'd always done well in my classes, the level of discussion was way over my head. At one point, he started explaining why he was in the hospital. Curious, I peeked at his laptop screen. That's when I realized he was on a video call. My messy hair and I were now face to face with 7 or 8 colleagues from overseas. Their serious, concerned expressions slowly turned into smirks, and they started chattering excitedly. Since Andrew was wearing headphones, I couldn't hear them. He noticed my gaze and turned to me with a smile. "She's my girlfriend." The colleagues smiled, and they started gesturing wildly. Andrew's declaration left me at a loss. When I dragged him off the street and lied to my professor that he was my boyfriend, it was just a quick fix. He'd joked about us being a couple before, even though it was fake. But hearing him claim me in front of all these people left me flustered. I forced a smile at the screen, then lay back down. They chatted a bit more before finally ending the meeting. Andrew closed his laptop and handed me a glass of water, his face full of concern. "You haven't been eating breakfast, and all those late nights caught up with you. You've got low blood sugar." I wanted to go back to my dorm and relax, but how could I leave before my professor? "Thanks for taking care of me, despite your busy schedule." He frowned and touched my forehead. That sounded a bit sarcastic. Men and their overactive imaginations. I wasn't being sarcastic. I just didn't want to pull all-nighters anymore. After a few IV drips, I was feeling much better and checked out that afternoon. Andrew was swamped, constantly handling work on the way back. Watching him juggle everything while still checking on me, I actually started to feel bad for him. Feeling sorry for a man is the beginning of the end. True to form, to make my life easier, he insisted I move my office to his apartment. He even started working from home when he didn't have classes, claiming it was easier to cook breakfast for me. But most mornings, I just grabbed something on the way and ate with him. A few days later, he said commuting from campus was a waste of time and told me to move out. I spent a few days looking for a place and finally settled on the apartment across from his. The day I met the landlord was a weekend, and Andrew gave me the day off. I waited outside for what felt like forever, texting the landlord repeatedly before finally getting a reply. "Turn around." I turned and saw Andrew stepping out of his apartment, walking toward me. He casually pulled me aside, fiddled with a massive keychain, and finally found the right one to unlock the door. "Juliet, most of this building belongs to my family. If you marry me, it will be part of our shared property." The man in front of me suddenly seemed larger than life. I stared at the apartment, speechless. Andrew led me inside. The place had 2 bedrooms. He pointed to the one with sunlight streaming in. "This is the one I was going to rent to you. But the place is big, and renting it to you at this price is a bit of a loss for me. So, would you consider sharing the apartment?" I nodded. The apartment was a great deal, and being close to him meant I could get home sooner after work. "Can you lower the rent a bit? If it's going to be part of our shared property, why not haggle?" He shook his head. "It's already cheap, but since you're my student, I should help out. I'll cover your rent." Wait, so he's renting the place to me and then paying the rent himself? Why not just let me stay there without the middleman? After signing the agreement, I didn't gain or lose anything, but the agent made a killing. "You might as well have given me the agent's fee. Keep it in the family, right?" He nodded. I didn't have to go through an agent, but I was worried you'd say no if I just let you move in. But you just said, family. Well, it's not exactly wrong. After all, he and his dad are basically supporting me. My old professor still gave me a monthly stipend, and my new one took care of my daily needs. Yeah, you and your dad are basically my sugar daddies. That night, I moved into the apartment. I spent hours unpacking when Andrew texted me. Juliet, your roommate is here. Can you open the door? Wow, he found a roommate fast. I tidied up the living room, hoping to make a good impression. As I wondered what she'd be like, the doorbell rang. Welcome. But before I could finish, I saw Andrew hauling bags and boxes from his apartment across the hall, piling them up at my doorstep. What's this? He glanced at the towels in my hands, took one, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. My dad just rented out my place, and the new tenants are moving in soon. I'm homeless for a few days, so I'll crash with you. Dr. Thompson, this doesn't seem right. He looked at me, amused. You've been calling me Andrew all this time, and now you're calling me, Drive. Thompson, too late. From now on, you can call me, roommate. I rolled my eyes. I wasn't calling you. I meant your dad. Ignoring me, he pushed his luggage inside. I sat on the couch watching TV while Andrew cleaned. While mopping, he suddenly stopped and turned to me. Do you remember that you're my girlfriend? I was caught off guard, staring at him, speechless. He sighed and dragged the mop into the bathroom. Guess not. Need a refresher? I shook my head like a bobblehead. He didn't push it, just smiled and kept cleaning. Later, while I was reading, my old professor texted me. Juliet, you free for a meeting? Even though most of my research was with Andrew now, Dr. Thompson was still my official professor. If he had tasks for me, I couldn't say no. Yes. He sent me a meeting link, and I hurriedly joined. Only 3 people were in the call. Me, Dr. Thompson, and Andrew. The meeting title was Progress Report on Andrew and Juliet's Relationship. Dr. Thompson cleared his throat. Turn your cameras on. I didn't want to, so I lied. My camera's broken, Dr. Thompson. Then Andrew unmuted. It's fine. I'm with Juliet. I'll go find her. Before I could say my camera was fixed, Andrew was knocking on my door. Reluctantly, we sat on the bed together, facing the laptop. Dr. Thompson was grinning ear to ear, shuffling some papers. Given that Andrew and Juliet have known each other for a while and have admitted to being in a relationship, this meeting will focus on Andrew's progress report. I glanced at Andrew, who looked dead serious. He opened a stack of documents, shared his screen, and pulled up a PowerPoint. The first slide had bold red text. Progress report on Andrew and Juliet's relationship. He launched into his presentation, more formal than any research meeting I'd ever attended. Juliet is a beautiful, kind, and optimistic individual. Based on my analysis of her personality, she seems to prefer gentle, caring men, like myself. Oh, come on. This was beyond shameless. Seeing how serious Andrew and Dr. Thompson were, I didn't dare interrupt. He went on and on, from the Big Bang to human evolution to future technology, leaving me utterly lost. While he rambled, I grabbed the documents in front of him. They were meticulously organized, detailing every interaction we'd had since we met. I was oddly touched by how thorough he'd been. After half an hour, he finally wrapped up. Dr. Thompson nodded enthusiastically. Good job. Keep it up. Next time, I hope you bring me a grandchild. I blushed and ducked out of the frame. That was way too fast. Andrew nodded. We'll respect Juliet's wishes. All right, meeting adjourned. Finally, it was over. I sighed in relief and tried to get off the bed, but my shirt got caught on Andrew's zipper. I pulled away too quickly, and the fabric tore slightly. Andrew, caught off balance, tumbled toward me. I checked my shirt. Thankfully, the tear wasn't too big. When I looked back, Andrew was staring at me intently. He leaned in, closer and closer. Just as he was about to kiss me, he stopped. Juliet, will you be my girlfriend? After spending so much time with Andrew, I'd developed feelings for him, especially when he'd introduced me as his girlfriend to his colleagues. That had made my heart flutter. But Andrew was so amazing. I wasn't sure I deserved him. He had 23 publications. After all, as I hesitated, a voice came from the laptop. Just say yes already. What are you waiting for? We both froze, especially Andrew, who practically leapt off me. In his haste, my shirt tore again. Before I could react, I felt a cold draft on my stomach. I frantically tried to cover myself with one hand while reaching for the blanket with the other, but it was trapped under me. Andrew slammed the laptop shut. As it closed, I heard Drive. Thompson's voice. Say yes. Andrew, why'd you shut it? I wasn't done watching. Then another voice chimed in. A woman's. Yeah, we were enjoying the live show. Don't cut it off. I glanced awkwardly at Andrew. His eyes darted around the room, landing on everything except me. His ears bright red. He touched his ear, got up from the bed, and took a few steps back. With him gone, I finally felt safe to sit up, wrapping the blanket tightly around myself. The meeting had left me flustered, and I was already sweating. Andrew wasn't faring much better. His hair was sticking to his forehead. Dr. Thompson? I tentatively called out to him. He finally looked up. With my permission, he slowly walked over and started gathering his laptop and documents. Juliet, my parents can be a bit enthusiastic. Don't take it personally. Enthusiastic was an understatement, but I was happy to have their approval. I wasn't sure why they were so invested in Andrew and me being together, but their efforts showed they'd be thrilled to have me as their daughter-in-law. How could I mind when they were so sweet? What I did mind, though, was my shirt. A tiny tug from a zipper, and it tore wide open. Curse those shady online sellers. I almost had a wardrobe malfunction in front of my professor, his wife, and Andrew. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I sat on the bed, pouting. Andrew finished tidying up and cautiously glanced at me. Are you really that mad? Yes, I practically growled. They're too out of line. Andrew looked a bit upset and moved closer. They're not that bad, are they? I knew the seller wasn't malicious, just cutting corners. But I'd nearly been exposed. Wasn't I allowed to be angry? They are that bad. His expression softened, and he patted my head. I'll talk to them. They won't do this again. I looked at him with newfound respect. I knew his family was well off. His dad being a professor with multiple properties was impressive enough. But to have connections with online retailers too? Andrew seemed flustered by my gaze and took a step back. Why are you looking at me like that? Like you did when you found out about my publications? I scooted closer, reaching out from under the blanket to grab his wrist. Dr. Thompson, can you get them to refund me? Refund? He stared at me, confused. I thought, why are you playing dumb? With all your wealth, you're worried about flaunting it in front of me? You want to drop out? And get a tuition refund? What was he talking about? No, didn't you say you'd talk to them about selling shady products? He looked even more puzzled, frowning. Wait, aren't you saying my parents are out of line? Now we were completely misunderstanding each other. He thought I was criticizing his parents, while I was just complaining about my cheap shirt. No, I'm talking about my crappy shirt. His frown finally eased, and he let out a deep breath. You scared me. I thought you wanted to drop out. After that meeting, Andrew never brought up dating me again, but his actions made it clear he still had feelings for me, and I couldn't deny I liked him too. But I wasn't about to make the first move, so I started dropping hints. Like today, when I cut a watermelon into a heart shape. Dr. Thompson, what does this watermelon look like to you? He stopped working, leaned back in his chair, and smiled at the plate. Why did you cut a watermelon to look like an apple? If you wanted an apple, I'd have bought you one. I huffed in frustration, holding up the watermelon to inspect my carving. It looked like a heart, just a bit round at the tip. But that rounded tip symbolized how my love for him had smoothed all my edges. When that didn't work, I tried another approach. Using all the knowledge from my grad school entrance exams, I brought him a polar equation for a heart-shaped curve. Dr. Thompson, how do you graph this coordinate equation? He glanced at it and gave me a knowing look. Did you get into grad school on your own? I nodded. Then go check the textbook. It's definitely in there. Another failed attempt. As I lay on the couch brainstorming my next move, Andrew pulled me up. Juliet, I've got a task for you. He handed me 2 thick stacks of documents. Take some time to go through these. I've compiled them for your research topic, and I've even identified the innovation points. Organize them, dig deeper, and try to draft a paper within a month. A month? Isn't that too short? I was still new to grad school, and my research wasn't that advanced. Writing a paper in a month seemed impossible. Andrew thought for a moment and nodded. It might be a bit challenging for you. He took the documents back and handed me another stack. I'm using this research for a competition. You can write the proposal instead. Same deadline, 1 month. Writing a proposal was still tough, but it had to be easier than drafting a paper for an SCI journal in a month. He detailed our design concept and process, which were nearly identical to Isabel's. 2 judges whispered nearby, and I caught fragments of their conversation. The similarity is too high. One of them must have copied. It's hard to say. The girl earlier was very clear and answered every question well. Andrew flipped to a slide I hadn't seen before. I know my project overlaps significantly with the second presenter's, but through my research, I've found that all previous arguments were flawed. We overlooked a small but crucial factor. His explanation revealed how significant this oversight was. His points were well supported with experimental data. I had no idea when he'd done these experiments, but his research skills were undeniable. I glanced at Isabel. She was clenching her fists, her eyes red as she stared at Andrew. This competition was live-streamed. If she was accused of plagiarism, her academic career would be over. The judges applauded Andrew's presentation, and the outcome was clear. Out of respect for Isabel's professor, they didn't outright accuse her of plagiarism, but everyone knew the truth. I rushed to Andrew, beaming. When did you do those experiments? He leaned down to my level. You were about to cry earlier, and now you're fine? I touched my chest. I was scared we were done for. He straightened and looked behind me. I hugged the documents and hurried back to my room. We'd been working non-stop for weeks. I was focused on the competition, but I wasn't sure what Andrew was up to. Clearly, he was busier than I was. His light was often on until 1 or 2 a.m. I worried about his health and tried to make him snacks whenever I could. As the competition date approached, my project, under Andrew's guidance, was nearly complete. I proudly brought the draft of my proposal to Andrew, only to find him packing his bags. Are you moving out? He paused, not looking at me. You know Professor White, right? He's one of my former students who stayed at the university. His team is also competing, and they're sending a girl over. By seniority, she's your academic junior. I thought, since you're both women, she could stay with you for a few days. It'll be good company. Plus, I'm technically your professor. If people find out we're living together, it could hurt your reputation. They might think there's something going on. Oh, I thought it was because I'd been underperforming and he'd given up on me. I knew he meant well, but I wanted to show I cared. I swayed a little. But there is something going on, isn't there? His lip twitched, and he covered his eyes. Don't do that. It's weird. I rolled my eyes, clueless. My academic junior arrived the next day. I went to pick her up. The moment she walked in, she flopped onto the bed. She hesitated for a moment, unable to bring herself to greet me. You can call me Juliet. She sighed in relief. Juliet, this place is amazing. Yeah, and it might one day be mine. Her name was Isabel Carlyle, and she was the top student in her year. Their team was taking this competition seriously because a first-place win would significantly boost their professor's research profile. Andrew was also invested. It was his first competition since joining the university. I wasn't sure why he trusted me with the entire project. As the competition neared, I spent my days at Andrew's place, refining the project with him. Honestly, since he moved out, I'd been drowning in chores. I couldn't exactly ask Isabel to help, so everything fell on me. After Andrew pointed out the last issue, I complained about not wanting to mop. Surprisingly, he was in a good mood and offered to help. I'm up late anyway. How about 2 a.m.? I'll come clean up. Isabel would definitely be asleep by then, so I agreed without hesitation. At 2 a.m., Andrew showed up. I followed him around, watching him work. Dr. Thompson, don't we look like we're sneaking around? He snorted. What couple cleans their apartment at 2 a.m.? Just then, the lights flicked on, blinding me. Isabel's voice came from her doorway. Are you two together? I quickly shook my head. He's helping me with my project. At 2 a.m. I nudged Andrew. He snapped out of it. We're really working on the project. He held up the mop. It's about optimizing mop functionality. Isabel looked skeptical but grabbed a glass of water before heading back to her room. It's late. Keep it down. People might talk. I nodded and pushed her back inside. With her on alert, we couldn't keep cleaning, so I dragged Andrew into my room. Want to review my proposal? He nodded, pulling out a USB drive to make a backup. He was focused, but I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. When I woke up, Andrew was gone. I checked the proposal on my computer. He'd already formatted it. It was almost ready. As the competition approached, Andrew submitted the final version of the proposal, waiting for the preliminary review and defense. On the last day to submit, Isabel came to me, her laptop in hand, looking distressed. Juliet, my laptop crashed, and if I don't submit my proposal today, it's over. Can I borrow your computer? I agreed without thinking. After all, there wasn't anything important on it. The day of the competition arrived, and Andrew took me to the venue early. He was wearing a suit and looked incredibly handsome. Isabel showed up soon after and greeted us warmly. Hi, Drive. Thompson, sorry I missed you last time. Andrew smiled. It's fine. Last time was at 2 a.m. In the living room, of course it was rushed. Isabel fiddled with her hair clip. Dr. Thompson, you arranged my stay. How about I treat you to dinner later? Andrew glanced at me. You coming? Isabel hadn't invited me, so I declined. I'll pass. Andrew looked at Isabel. If she's not going, neither am I. Isabel pouted. Okay. The competition order was announced soon after. Isabel was second. We were fifth. I wanted to get it over with, but Andrew wasn't in a hurry. Going later lets us see what we're up against. When it was Isabel's turn, she projected her presentation. Her slides were clean and professional, but her title was almost identical to ours. I looked at Andrew, but he was calm, even amused. He leaned over and whispered, "Same topic. Let's see how she does." As Isabel's presentation went on, I felt something was off. Even if the title was the same, I could chalk it up to coincidence. But the design background, concept, project progress, and even the data were identical to ours. I'd handled this project entirely on my own. No one knew it better than I did. It was clear. Isabel's project was mine. Then I remembered the day she'd borrowed my computer, claiming hers had crashed. I was too trusting, always assuming the best in people. I hadn't been cautious enough. I turned to Andrew, but he seemed calm, as if nothing was wrong. Maybe he hadn't reviewed the proposal carefully and didn't notice. "Andrew, this project is..." I didn't finish. Andrew glanced at me, then back at Isabel. "Exactly the same, right?" I nodded, on the verge of tears. "What do we do? 2 identical projects, and we're up after her." He patted my head, comforting me. "Juliet, no one knows this project better than we do. Trust me, okay?" His calmness reassured me, and I finally relaxed, nodding. When it was our turn, Andrew stepped up and opened our presentation, which had a title almost identical to Isabel's. The room buzzed with murmurs about the duplication, but as Andrew began speaking, the noise died down. "Let's go talk to her." I turned and saw Isabel packing up, tears streaming down her face. She tried to leave when she saw us approaching. "Isabel, let's grab a meal?" She paused, seemingly overwhelmed, and ran off, crying harder. Andrew was in a great mood, looking at me more affectionately than ever. "She's not coming. Let's go." Over dinner, Andrew explained how he'd been prepared. Midway through my research, he'd noticed something was off, but instead of telling me, he let me continue while he explored another direction to compare the results. In the end, he found my approach was completely wrong. By then, Isabel had already moved in. Her professor, Professor White, had a history of borrowing others' ideas, a stain on Dr. Thompson's teaching career. Andrew wasn't sure Isabel would do the same, but he stayed cautious. This competition was also a lesson for me. Telling you 100 times isn't as effective as letting you experience it once. When we got back, Isabel had already packed up and left. Andrew happily moved his things back in. He'd been in a great mood lately, always smiling at me. One evening, he mysteriously pulled me to his computer. "I have a surprise for you." My heart raced. Had he finally figured it out and was going to confess again? But I kept my cool. "What is it?" He pointed to the screen. "Open it." Was he going to confess via computer? Not even a flower? I opened it, disappointed, only to see an email filled with English text. "I've compiled the competition project and submitted it to a journal. You're the second author." I turned and hugged him tightly. Second author? That was still an SCI paper, with a second author. A first author wasn't far off, but it's not guaranteed to be accepted. "I believe in you." I hugged him tighter, and he sighed before holding me close. "Juliet," he whispered in my ear, "remember when you said you'd call me, honey, if I helped you publish a paper?" I nodded. "I remember, but I can't say it." He patted my head. "It's okay. Take your time." Later, as I was grinning ear to ear, Andrew walked in with a plate of cut fruit. "Juliet, what does this watermelon look like?" It was shaped like a heart, just like the one I'd cut for him. I pretended not to know. "Why did you cut a watermelon to look like an apple? If you wanted an apple, I'd have bought you one." He sighed and put the plate down. "You're still holding a grudge?" "It's a heart." "A heart." I feigned indifference. "Oh, but the tip's so round." He nodded, scooping a piece and feeding it to me. "Because I've smoothed all my edges for you." I'd meant to say that to him, but hearing it from him just made me cringe. "You're so cheesy." Epilogue. The first time I saw Juliet was during her graduate school entrance interview. It was held online due to the distance, and since my dad was busy, he asked me to step in and help evaluate the candidates. That's when I saw her. Throughout the entire interview, she was calm and composed. Even when faced with questions she wasn't entirely familiar with, she managed to think on her feet and present her own insights. But what I couldn't forget was the moment the interview ended. She smiled brightly and said, "Thank you for your hard work, professors." I think I fell for her right then. For this radiant, confident girl, I gave her a high score and convinced my dad to take her on as his student. At the time, I was abroad, preparing to return home. My dad, wanting to create an opportunity for us to meet, scheduled the welcome dinner for after my return. I'd been wondering how to strike up a conversation with her, but fate had other plans. She was pacing outside the restaurant, looking unsure, and then, she grabbed my arm. "Hey, do you have a girlfriend?" Inside, I was over the moon, but I kept my cool. "No." And just like that, our story began.